Okay, welcome to the last go-to session for the month. This is the go-to session for week 4. The good news is I think this will probably be a little bit shorter of a session than usual just because I don't have as much to go through or teach or lecture upon tonight. So hopefully we can keep this to 40 minutes, 45 minutes, maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less, but we'll get rolling so that we can move on with our nights. I know that you have a lot to work on. This week is pretty much free for you. You have a go-to quiz related to this session to take, but otherwise you have the entire week to just work on your actual public service announcement. So that's good. This is a light week. Like I said, way back in week 1, it's kind of designed that way, where week 1 and week 2 are pretty busy and you have a lot to do, but then week 3 gets lighter with just peer review, and week 4 even gets lighter with just a go-to quiz, and then pretty much the rest of the week free for you to work on your final projects. So this go-to session will mostly be about that final project. Just a reminder of what you need to do, the requirements for the final project, and I'll touch a little bit on APA format in terms of how to cite images or music, because some of you might use those materials in your final project. Okay, so let's get rolling. First of all, I do want to backtrack just a little bit and try to connect this to the peer review that you completed last week. But let me backtrack even further by raising this question of, if you look at the screen here, I have up here as a title these words editing versus revising, and you have some pictures there to sort of help you clue you into what that means. Like when you see those words editing versus revising, you can use the chat box or you can raise your hand and volunteer an answer. But like, what's the difference between the two? Like if you hear the word editing, what does that mean? Or what does it mean in comparison to revising? Like, what's the big difference between the two? I swear I'm going to tie this into what you're going to do with your final project in just a second. But what's the difference between these two terms, do you think? I'm going to take a sip from my coffee as I wait erudite and esoteric answers. Scott says he thinks of editing more as polish, while revising is bigger picture changes. Okay, I like that. Earlier today, when I taught actually in the classroom on campus, someone had the exact same response but said the opposite. Their revising is polishing and editing. And I told her, that's a great answer, it's just you got things reversed. So Scott is pretty much right on there. Editing, which is kind of captured in this image here on the left with the person sort of typing on the keyboard, is the smaller stuff. If you think about editing, that should make sense, right? Editing of a film is typically stuff that happens after the fact when all the footage is shot. So a screenplay has been written, shots have been filmed, everything's in place, but someone needs to sit down and really edit the work. The same thing when it comes to writing. Once you've produced, let's say, a draft of your essay, then you need to sit down and sort of fix pieces of it, if it's more or less in place. While revising, if you look at the picture on the right here, this is why I have this giant picture of a Sauron looking eye. You can see in the word revising, it kind of contains that word vision. You may not see it, but that's where revising comes from, which essentially means to see things again, right? Revision, to see things anew or to see things again. Revision is more global. And the reason I asked for this comparison is editing is what you would do in a traditional college classroom. For example, you take an English course, you write a draft of your essay, you hand it in again. Ideally, there should be revising going on, but lots of times people will concentrate more on editing, and then the instructor evaluates it for a new grade. But here, because you're not working on the essay again, you're actually producing a multimedia public service announcement. We've moved away from the essay, because we're finished with that. This stuff, okay, the stuff on the right here, the big Sauron-looking eye, revising, revisioning, that's the stuff you really need to be thinking about. It's not that editing doesn't play any sort of role. Editing, I think, refers to sort of the lower order concerns that we talked about in last week's session. So, proofreading, grammar, sentence and structure, all that. Editing is still important. You certainly don't want to hand in, for example, a comic PSA that's filled with errors. You certainly don't want to submit an audio PSA or a video PSA that contains visible grammar errors or spoken grammar errors. So it's not that editing isn't important at all, but for this final project, the PSA, the actual multimedia public service announcement, revising is sort of the key thing that we're doing here, more than editing. Because it's going to require you, and this is why I stress here in the title, revision your PSA. That's why I have this picture of the house being built, is that you sort of have to build this new structure from the ground up. It's not that you have to build it completely anew. Obviously, you've already chosen your topic way back in week one. You've researched it, you've explored it, you've written an essay about it. But when it comes to the actual public service announcement, you will have to sort of build things anew. It doesn't mean that you're not going to use stuff that you explored in your essay. Obviously, you will, but you're going to need to rethink it entirely. I think I mentioned this last week, but for example, with an audio PSA, so let's say you're producing a 1 to 2 minute radio style piece, something you could imagine listening to in your car. It's not going to be the equivalent of listening to an essay spoken out loud. I don't see it often, but sometimes students make that mistake. They sort of think, oh, an audio piece. I just need to turn on my computer's microphone and essentially read my essay out loud. But imagine how boring that would be if you were driving in your car, right? I mean, PSAs, I think they're less common on the air now than they used to be, but probably most of you have heard examples of audio public service announcements. Imagine driving in your car and there's the equivalent of someone just reading an essay out loud. That probably wouldn't grab you. So all of you have this challenge of whether you're working with the video, the audio, the comic, the song. What are the other options? I think those are the four biggies. There's a game option, which very few people choose. Some people are pitching their own ideas for a public service announcement form. But whatever format you've chosen, the big challenge is to think about your material in a different way and what is the best way to present it to your specific audience. If your specific audience is, I don't know, parents or music fans or CEOs of a gaming company or magazine editors, whoever your specific audience is, like what will reach them the best way and what's the best format to deliver that. Even if you've chosen a specific format like video, audio, etc. I mean, given the 1 to 3 minute space that you have, what's the best way to reach your audience? I think I touched on this last week. Will you deliver your information straightforwardly, which is perfectly fine? Or will you come up with a concept or a story or some sort of, not gimmick in the bad sense, but will you find an alternative way to deliver that information? And will that format be the best way to reach your specific audience? All of this requires revisioning, revising your material, looking at it new again. So you've already built one house, which was your essay. You're building a new house for your actual public service announcement. And that's the big deal here. So here comes quiz question number 1. I'm going to let it linger on the screen so you can take a screenshot or jot it down. Let me move the control panel out of the way so people can see. Basically, just answer what I've just gone over. What is the difference between editing and revising, and how is this difference important for your final public service announcement project? Okay. And we're moving. We're moving. Number 2, peer feedback. How things go. I only have 6 of you in the room, but of the 6 people here, did you all receive feedback? Was there anybody who didn't receive feedback? I know I need to fix the peer review process so it works a little bit more smoothly. I need to either assign people partners, or I need to make it a requirement that you, I don't know, respond to the person who's ever in front of you on the discussion board. Right now, I just leave it to people to choose someone and hopefully spread the wealth. But was there anybody here who didn't receive feedback? I know there's always 4 or 5 in a class of 25 who didn't. I'm just curious if that happened to anybody in the room here tonight. Patrick received feedback. Okay, awesome. Patrick's the only one. Maybe my other people fell asleep. We're only 10 minutes into the session. It's a long month. You're in good company, by the way. What month are we in? November. November is a good month. We go 4 full weeks before Thanksgiving. Next month, the people are going to have a really rough time. We have to cram 4 weeks of material into 3 full weeks. So that's going to be hectic. Okay, so Scott and Patrick were partners. Damien got feedback. Marcel received feedback too. Okay, that's good to know. So most of you receive feedback. The thing I want to stress is be sure that you read that feedback, okay? I know that some people kind of run to the discussion boards, make comments, and then never go back to see if anybody sort of wrote to them. So if you didn't check what others have written to you, please do so. Because peer feedback is part of what's going to help you with the public service announcement, along with my feedback. Okay, I just spent an entire week getting through all 75 essays that were handed in among my three classes. It took me a little bit of time, so I apologize if you were on the latter end of that feedback. Some of you got feedback right away earlier in the week. Some of you had to wait a little bit, but you receive peer feedback. You receive feedback from me, and now you need to sit down and decide what makes sense and what doesn't. Okay, that's a big part of not just English classes, but and not just being even a student, but just being a mature human being. You're going to receive a lot of feedback in life, and you're going to have to decide for yourself what makes sense and what doesn't. So consider what your classmates have written to you. Consider what I have written to you, and decide what makes sense and what doesn't, and use what makes sense and ignore the rest. That said, don't ignore things out of hand. Okay, I respect people who disagree with me. I respect people who have a strong stance on their topics. But on the other hand, you shouldn't just dismiss things out of hand. So make sure that you read the feedback, that you digest it, that you take some time to think about it, and then decide what's best, and particularly in terms of what's going to help you best to develop your public service announcement. Because, I mean, you know, even though I stress it in the week 3 go-to session, some people still concentrate on giving feedback in terms of like how to improve the essay. But you're not rewriting the essay. You're actually working on the PSA. So what sort of feedback that you received will help you the most? And that leads me into quiz question number 2. So here we go. Take a screenshot or jot it down. How will the peer feedback influence your PSA project? Or if you didn't receive peer feedback from another classmate, you can respond to my feedback. How will my feedback influence your PSA project? And I mean, you know, mostly in terms of the obvious stuff. If you've read my comments, I'm pretty, I wouldn't say narrow, but I do have main things I look for. I'm obsessed with, is there a clear industry related problem that's identified? That's checklist number 1. Number 2, is there a specific audience identified that the writer is trying to reach? That's checklist number 2. Is there a clear call to action, meaning there's something specific that you want that audience to do to, if not completely solve the problem, because that's a little bit difficult to do sometimes, then at least asking your audience to do something that alleviates the problem. Okay? Most people are okay in this area, but some people probably needed some help. These are the things I focus on the most, but other people might have mentioned, you know, there might have been a specific piece of evidence that seemed missing. There might have been a discussion point that seemed a little bit confusing or fuzzy. So don't rule out those things either. But you know, if you received any big picture feedback, that's obviously important. The direction your PSA will take. But if you met those first 3 checklist items, you might want to consider other things, like you know, was your supporting evidence strong? I did respond to a couple people where it sometimes felt like they were writing so much from their point of view that it wasn't relying much on any sort of outside uh, research or statistics or facts or quotations at all. So that was a concern sometimes. Um, but basically, how will the peer feedback or my feedback influence the choices you will make when it comes to your actual multimodal public service announcement? Okay, moving on. Citation. You thought we were done, right? We spent week 2 talking a lot about APA. I did a little walkthrough session right here in the go-to meeting where I walk students through the steps of how to set up their paper in terms of formatting, right? Basics like margins, header, paragraphing, page numbers. I kind of focus more on the general ideas of how we handle in-text citations and the references page, and I pointed you to other sources that you had available to you as uploaded assets to turn to. Your McGraw-Hill textbook, the APA Basics PowerPoint presentation, the sample student essay, etc. To kind of, if you needed to learn the finer points of APA, you had those available to you. But we're not done, okay? Even though we talked generally about how to cite articles, any of you that use images or music in your final projects need to cite those things. And let me give a strong warning again. I think most people got it, but I still saw some people in their go-to quiz answers from last week sort of making me nervous. Again, no copyrighted material can be used. So no images can be used that are not allowable. No music can be used that is not allowable. No film images or television images can be used that is not allowable. And that goes for YouTube, okay? Just because something's uploaded to YouTube doesn't make it okay for you then to use it, because we all know that there's tons of stuff up on YouTube that isn't really allowable. Sometimes I have students film, like, I don't know, they'll do a film related PSA and they'll actually take out their camcorder and film their television while a movie is showing on the screen. But that's no difference than like sneaking in a cam to an actual theater and capturing footage. I think I said this in another session too, but it's not like Steven Spielberg or I don't know, Jay-Z or someone else, a big name like that, is really going to find out about you and come down. But it's really more about Full Sail. You guys are heading into industries where these issues are going to be super important. You won't be able to just grab whatever image, whatever music file, whatever video file that you want and just use it without permission. So that's why we stress it so hard here. So just a reminder that all images and music must be cited. And really, the images and music, I mean, or video, should be either shot by you, meaning you took it, you created it, you owned it, or it needs to come from an absolutely allowable site. So let's take a look at how you cite things that are allowable. Let's start with, oh, okay. Real quickly, because this is a quiz question. I'm like the worst teacher in the world. I actually give the quiz answers away before you see the questions. The importance of citation, okay? What I just went over, it's a requirement for this course. Not just this course, but the university. It's not just me saying this. Like, the university really comes down hard on this stuff. In part because it's just good strategy no matter what, but also because technically Full Sail is a for-profit university. For example, even we instructors cannot show any copyrighted material. Like, I would love to come into my actual on-campus classes and show a clip of a film, or I don't know, do something else that normally would be okay at a public school, but I can't do that here. Okay, here in Orlando, because Disney is nearby and Universal is nearby, like, it's a big no-no. No Disney stuff, no Universal stuff. So it's a requirement not just for students but for faculty as well. Okay, so importance of citation, number one, is requirement. Number two, yeah, you need to give credit to those who've helped you create your project. So even when it's allowable, you still need to give credit. And lastly, people might find your sources useful. I don't know how many of you do research in your regular life, but I mean, those of us who are sort of in academics, we're used to reading things, articles, essays, journal pieces, where the list of resources that comes at the end, references or works cited, is incredibly valuable because it allows us to sort of scan what was interesting in your own piece so that we can read it on our own. Even if you don't have an academic background, think of the way that you surf the internet. You'll find one link that leads you to another, that leads you to another, that leads you to another. And that's another example of how sources, even if you don't think of them as sources, are valuable, right? One piece of information leads you to another, to another. So those are sort of my three key points here that will appear in a quiz question. Citation is important because it's a requirement, because you always have to give credit, and because others might find what you use helpful. Okay, so here's the nitty gritty. Is that the expression? Yes, nitty gritty stuff about how to cite music and images. If you think you're going to be using music, whether it's from the Westar music databases or I don't know, some other allowable Creative Commons type source, here are the rules for citing it. So if you need to jot this down or take a screenshot, do so. Up here is sort of the nitpicky details, but it might be more useful just to look at the example, because if you look at the example, you'll see that it's pretty much following the same rules that you learned for citing an article. So we don't have an author's last name, but we have a composer. And again, the same protocol, right? Last name, first initial. If there's a year for the piece, we put those in parentheses. If there's a title for the track, we list the title. Instead of a publication name or a newspaper name or a website name, we have the name of the album itself. Okay, that's what this is: rock, action, emotion. Actually, I'm missing something here. I fixed it in my other presentation. But let me put it here real quickly. I'm going to add the word sound recording because this is important, and I'll explain why in just a second. Uh, we put in brackets sound recording because it tells us what kind of media this is. Because if we don't have it, we don't know if it's an article, we don't know if it's a photograph, we don't know if it's a sculpture, we don't know if it's a painting. So this identifies what it is. If there is nothing in brackets, we just assume it's a textual piece. That's why you didn't have to put in brackets for your APA references page with your essay, for example, bracket essay end bracket. Okay, it's sort of default that if you don't have that. But for other types of media, we need that so we understand what it is. And let me give a real quick example. If you go to the Full Sail library databases, which you should be super familiar with because you had to go there for your research, for your essay. And if we scroll down in the databases, you'll see the Westar Music databases link. There it is. You can see that gives you the login you need, which is library@fullsail.com, a password. I already have this stuff entered, so I'm just going to go on in. This is really cool because normally these music tracks would cost you anywhere between $15 and $60. But as a Full Sail student, you get it for free. And you can see there are a whole bunch of albums, everything from classical music to jazz to rock. And you can tell they're sort of generic tracks because they have these sort of corny titles like Rock, Running and Gunning, or Rock, Solid and Sauntering. Dance, Winner Take All. You can tell. They're sort of. They're written by real people. They're written by composers. They're written by musicians. But they're sort of these all-purpose music tracks that can work well if you're looking for something for a background, for example, for your project or for anything you're designing outside of this class as well. And if you go in, I just clicked on Rock, Action, and Emotion. That's the name of the album. You'll see that there are lots of tracks. Okay, so Letting Loose, Rolling Rock, blah blah blah, Broken Promises. And you can see here, there's a composer, Rick Ivanoff. And if we click on the actual song itself, we can get more information. So there's the composer's name, Richard Ivanoff. There's the name of the album, Rock, Action, and Emotion. It's published by Westar Music. We have a date here somewhere, or at least we used to, because I do have a date on my thing. Oh, there. Release date 2014. I don't think that matches what I have on the slide. But okay, if you go in here, you can find a date. You can basically find all the material that you need. So, and by the way, to get any of these songs, you just have to go through the kind of checkout system. You don't actually have to pay, but you have to go through the checkout process to get the MP3 file. And then it's yours to use or edit for your projects. But once you get that core information, you can go back and create your APA style citation. Whoops. I want to fix that indentation thing. Okay. And that's where I got all this information here. Right? The name, year, the name of the track, name of the album, identified as a sound recording, published by Westar Music. Images, same deal. So if you need to take a screenshot or jot down some things, do so. But it's the same thing, okay? We don't have an actual literal author's name, but we sometimes have a photographer's name and a date for when the photograph is taken, a name for the photograph. Again, we put in brackets the type of media it is, so in this case it's a photograph, and just a retrieve from line if you got it from online, much like you did when you had to put a retrieve from line for your article thing. So let me give a quick example of images, right? You should be taking your images from one of two places, either compfight.com, which is what I'm showing up here right now. Compfight is great because it's basically a Flickr search tool. If you use compfight.com, you'll find allowable images. Or you can use the AP Images database in the Full Sail library, okay? So again, if I go back to the full sale library, you should remember this from DGL, digital literacy, right? We go into the research databases, and there's this thing here called AP images. Okay, so if you get images from AP images or you get it from compfight.com, then I know it's mostly an allowable source. Both had different functions, or I should say different purposes. AP Images is great when you're looking for something specific. So let's say you're doing a top, I don't know, a PSA on music royalties, right? The royalties that streaming music companies pay out to artists. You might have heard the big news that Taylor Swift pulled her music from Spotify. Let's say you want to mention that in your public service announcement. Probably if you search the AP Images collection, you'll find lots of pictures for Taylor Swift. You try it out now on the fly. Right? Look, billion images of Taylor Swift. That's the good thing about AP Images because these are Associated Press photos, meaning they're photos taken for press purposes, news purposes. So chances are, if you're looking for something very, very specific, either topic related or person related, you'll find a ton of results. On the other hand, if you go to CompFight, I'm going to close some windows here. You probably won't get as much great stuff. You might get a result for Taylor Swift, but probably not. Let's see what happens. Wow, she must be super big. 'Cause some pictures of her do show up, but as you can see, it's not as many. Some of these don't even look like Taylor Swift. Like I don't think that's Taylor Swift right there. But okay, maybe she's a bad example because she's such a huge superstar. She comes up in any search. But in general, probably Comfight isn't the best place to find specific people, images. By the way, anything above the dotted line here, don't click on because it's just going to take you to another website that wants you to pay for these images. I think I might have mentioned this last time. Comfight is great when you're looking for more global pictures. So let's say you need pictures of a classroom or a computer or students or books, or I'm going to do a search now for puppies, right? Who doesn't love puppies? Anybody who says they don't love puppies does not pass this course. Just make sure that when you're at the left here, make sure that you have Creative Commons selected. Okay, that's important. I'm just going to pick on an image at random here. They all look cute, so I'm going to pick these guys right here. Okay, so I click on this image, and you can see, I'm going to blow this up. It says some rights reserved. That's what we're looking for. Some rights reserved. Anything that says all rights reserved, you cannot use. Okay, all rights reserved means you cannot touch it. It means all rights go back to the actual person who took the photo, and that you cannot use it without permission. Some rights reserved means you're allowed to use it, but you have to give credit. So let's say I love this picture of the two puppies. Okay, I can choose small, medium, or original, large, and download it. Okay, and save it to my desktop or wherever. But where do I get information on who took the photo? Normally, here's the full HTML. This is what you would use if you were creating, let's say, a web page. But I'm just going to go in here and pick out the URL. Most of you are pretty, I think, computer savvy. You know what these terms mean, URL, HTML. So I'm going to just go in and grab the URL, which is what I have highlighted here. Okay, so all this junk here I don't touch. I just grab the actual www thing. And I'm just going to put that into my browser. And I should get a pretty good result for the photo itself. Okay, so here's the person who took it, Rafael Accorsi. It does have a title, even though it's written in a weird font. Here, I'll make it bigger. It's called Beagles. Okay, it looks like Rafael might be from some other country. It looks like he's speaking Portuguese. We have any Portuguese speakers here? That's not Spanish. That's the language I know. That's not Spanish. It looks like Portuguese. Okay, well, we have a name. We have an actual title for the photograph. We even have a date. Let me move the control panel out of the way. Marcelo, thank you. Where are you from, sir? Okay, 2009, right? So we have a date for the. Okay, Brazil. Good. That. By the way, Portuguese. That's Brazil. Everybody thinks that South America is solidly Spanish, but no. Brazil is where Portuguese is spoken. Okay, so we have a date, 2009. Some rights are reserved. Okay, great. So we can use it. We have all the information we need. Now we just have to plug it in. Author, title, date. If we go back to our PowerPoint presentation, we just follow the template here, okay? So instead of Ganoza, this is just a photograph I found a long time ago, we would put his last name and initial, year, title, photograph, and then retrieve from would just be that URL that I plugged in here, okay? Right? Flickr.com, photos, blah, 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 blah. That's what I would paste in here for my retrieve from line. Again, if you're going to be using images that you find through comfight.com or through AP Images, take a screenshot or jot these things down. But this is essentially the format you need to use for citing images. Oh, and one more point. Okay, so Raphael, his full name is there. This person has a full name. You'll sometimes see sort of online monikers, or what's another word for moniker? What people use as their online identity. So if someone lists themselves as an author and they call themselves, I don't know, Hot Mama 77, as ridiculous as it might look, that's what you'd put for the author's name. Okay, so if they have some sort of username, that's what would go here. And some of this information may not be available. So if there's no date, you just put ND, right? So APA format, the rules you already learned. If there's no title, then there's no title. You just leave that out. Again, you just follow APA rules. You plug in what you have. You either ignore or put in abbreviations for what you don't have. But it's not that difficult. Same basic principles. We're just applying it to images and music. But make sure that your images do come from either comfight.com or AP Images, or if you think you found another Creative Commons site, you should probably run it by me so I can double check. What I don't want is you just Googling images, right? Because we can do that if we just, you guys do it all the time, right? So let me just put in a generic search thing. I don't know if this will result in anything. Puppies. Okay, right? This is what happens when you go into Google. So you get this thing, images for puppies. You click on it, more images for puppies. But chances are you don't know where these images came from. You don't know if they're all rights reserved or some rights reserved. So this is not what we do. We don't just head to the internet and grab what we want. I know that's tempting because so much of what we do online does feel like that. We just take what we want, we share what we want, we find a YouTube video that's cool, and we spread it around. But for this class, everything you use has to either be created by you or it has to come from an allowable source. So I can't stress that strongly enough. Did I make the joke last time? I think I did. that I don't want to hear like pop songs in your PSA projects. I don't want to see clips from actual movies. I don't want to see like Guardians of the Galaxy clips show up in your projects. I don't want to. I don't want to hear a Kesha song being used in your PSA. I don't want to hear some. I don't want to see some famous painting that's being used in your PSA. Okay, so anything that's not created by you should not be used. So quiz question number 3 goes back to this thing, right? Remember I listed 3 reasons why it's important to cite. So quiz question number 3 is why is it important to cite? So it's basically these 3 things, which is really dumb on my part because I just gave you the answer. But why is it important to cite? 3 reasons why. I'm going to linger on this slide a little bit before I move forward. We're almost done. Okay, and we're moving forward. The last thing I need to remind you of are the basic requirements for what you need to hand in. The final project is actually a portfolio. Some students make the mistake of thinking they just need to hand in the public service announcement and nothing else. And I always feel terrible because then those students lose a ton of points if they do that. Yes, the public service announcement is important. Yes, it's what we've been working on all month, but it's just one part of the final project requirement. So hey, giving me your song, your podcast, your video, your comic is not the only requirement for the final project. There are, in fact, other things to include, and here they are. Oops. Why? Okay, I lost a slide. Hold on. Actually, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to just show you. If we go into the FSO platform, okay, so the description for the final project, Here it is. Luckily, I already had it open. Okay, so 4.3 assignment, final project. If you click on it, you'll see here in the overview you get a list of what needs to be included. An APA cover page, a link to your final project, a copy of your script or lyrics, an APA style references page, and a 250 word reflection. All this needs to be included, so it's listed here in the final project description. It's also listed on the assignment sheet, which I think I have open. Okay, everything is due, by the way, the final Sunday of week 4. You can see it's 15% of your grade. It gives you instructions on what to do, like step 1, open a new Microsoft Word document, create a title page. Most of this you've done already, because if you already properly formatted things for your essay, you're pretty much good to go. Okay? Let me see if I can give an example. This, by the way, this is one of your assets that's uploaded for you to look at. It's in the final project activity, but it's a sample. It's not a sample project, but it's a sample format of how projects get handed in. So, for example, here's a cover page. Okay, right now it's just generic. Your title goes here, student name, Full Sail University. But if you already created a cover page for your essay and you did so correctly, then you can just carry that over. You'll need to change some details, like maybe you'll have a different title for your final project. Um, but just copy your template over and replace what you need, so you don't have to go through all those steps that I walked you through during week 2 again. Okay, like the header, the page number. And on page 2, you can see we're still following APA format. So at the very top of the page, centered, your title goes here for your final project, right? And then most people have a link to the project. When I say link to the project, I mean if you created a video, most people end up creating the actual movie and then uploading it to something like YouTube or Vimeo, and then they just provide the link. If it's a podcast or a song, they typically upload to something like SoundCloud and provide the link. If you're creating a comic, you either give me the URL to where the comic is located, or if it's something that you hand drew and you've uploaded it to an image file hosting site, you'll give me a link to that. So the link to your project goes here. Make sure that the link works. There's always about a handful of people I have to call every month, like literally call, to let them know that their link isn't working because the share settings aren't set correctly. So make sure that you have all of that working. But give me a working link to your project. Next, a script. So your script will go here. Comic people don't really need a script because their text is already contained in the comic itself. But if you created a video or an audio or a song, I need the script here, okay? The lyrics, the actual, I don't know, voiceover or narration or dialogue to your video or audio, it needs to go here. A, it helps me follow along more easily. And B, I think I said this last time, it shows evidence of planning. When I can see that someone has actually created a script and then carried out and executed that script, that's a good thing to see. When I don't see scripts, then it makes me more nervous because not all the times, but not all the time, but sometimes it's an indication that things were sort of done on the fly. You need a references page. The references page should include any references you use to write your essay, because technically they are informing your public service announcement, even if they're not cited or referenced or quoted directly in your public service announcement. They still informed it, so they should probably be listed. Plus, whatever images or music or outside material you used in your PSA. So here I just grabbed a bunch of stuff at random to create a references page. So here's a photograph, here's a sound file, here's an article, here's another photograph, okay? So you'll need a references page. And finally, you'll need a reflection. The reflection actually has very, very specific things you have to answer, and they're found on the assignment sheet. Again, I would say the two biggest flaws I see is people either just hand in the public service announcement and nothing else, or they complete all the components, but when it comes time to write a reflection, they just sort of make up a reflection instead of following the specific prompts you need to answer, which are contained on the assignment sheet. And they're over here on the right. Okay, write a reflexive essay of at least 250 words, and they're mostly global questions about the course as a whole, about your progress as a writer, about how your project evolved throughout the 4 weeks. So as long as you're following these starred items, you're okay. Note that this is different than a course evaluation. You have a separate activity on your FSO page, right? If I click on activities here and scroll to the very bottom, you'll see there's something called Okay, student course evaluation. That's where you get to write to your heart's content everything you loved about the course, what you didn't like, what you loved about me, what you didn't like about me. That's the place for this stuff to occur. Um, the reflection isn't so much about that. It's really more about your progress this month and what you've achieved as a writer, how your project has evolved, etc. But you need to be answering these questions. Okay, every month I get people who are just reflecting on, I don't know, their PSA topic itself. Like they'll write a 250 word piece about how record industry contracts are unfair. But that's not what the reflection is about. It's about these specific six starred points here on the actual assignment sheet. Yeah, and you have all these materials. Okay, the assignment sheet, the sample student for portfolio, or at least the format for it, as an downloadable asset for this project. Okay, so don't ignore that stuff. I try to cover as much as I can during the go-to sessions, and I know a lot of people rely on that, but never just completely ignore the assets because that's got information as well. Okay, so for the final project, remember there's a lot of stuff to hand in. It's another APA style submission with a cover page, with a link to your project, with a script, with a references page, and a reflection. If you're doing all those things, you're probably in pretty good shape. And here comes the final quiz question. How will your final project show your development as a writer during the month? And try to be both as broad and specific as you can. If those seem like complete opposites, what I mean by that is, on the one hand, be very, very specific about how your final project will show your development. On the other hand, think of the word writer in the broadest terms possible, okay? Because you're not literally writing an essay, you're creating a public service announcement. But if you think about the things we discussed this month, choosing a topic, narrowing it down, developing that topic, thinking about audience, thinking about how to reach an audience, thinking through research, exploration of the topic through an essay, then taking that material and having to kind of work from it to create a public service announcement. How will your final project show your overall development as a writer? And in this case, I mean writer in the largest term possible. Okay? A replacement for writer might also be like as a thinker or a creator, a student. But how will your final project show this development? And I'm going to move on. I think actually that might be the last slide, to be honest. Questions? Preguntas. I don't know how to say questions in Portuguese. But now is the time to ask questions, okay, about anything. About McGraw Hill stuff, about final project requirements, about what you need to do this week, about due dates, about, I don't know, the weather and how cold it is here in Florida. Anything that you can think of. Because you can certainly contact me, obviously, in other ways, but we still, this is our like last live time to chat with one another. So any questions that people have? Oh, you're in Buffalo, Scott? Wow, that's got to be rough. I was laughing at people over the weekend because the whole country is freezing and we were in the 80s. But now we're feeling it. And when I say feeling it, it's not that bad. I think the high today was in the, I don't know, upper 50s, and we might get around 40 overnight, but that's freezing for us. Absolutely freezing. So we're all panicking. It's like I feel like I'm in that movie Castaway. I feel like I need to set my couch on fire in order to stay alive, even though most people would laugh at 50-degree weather as being cold. But yeah, it's very, very cold in Florida. Any other questions? Comments? Marissa says, I don't know what to ask, but I do feel this project is overwhelming. Yes, some people might feel the same way. I would say try to make it as simple as possible. Remember, The PSA, the public service announcement, is deceptively simple. You need to do three things. You need to identify a problem, speak to a specific audience about that problem, and ask that specific audience to do something. You just have to find the best way to deliver that information in the form of a video, song, comic. If I approved another sort of format like a graphic design thing, that's your goal. So don't freak out that much. Okay, I know it's challenging, but first of all, Full Sail students are largely up to the task. Like they're really creative people and can usually do pretty good, pretty strong things. Second, I think I mentioned this last week. I am mostly interested in the message and how clear that message is being communicated. Yes, I do consider other things like overall professionalism and whether it's fair or not. I do sort of make some evaluations based on what I think is a strong effort from one student compared to another. Although I know that can lead one to trouble, but I'm not. When it comes to songs, I'm not Adam Levine from The Voice. I'm not Steven Spielberg when it comes to films. I'm not. I'm not going to be judging your projects in that sort of intense of a way. I'm just looking for you to produce the best public service announcement that you can produce. Okay, so it's really about making the best and strongest effort that you can. Anything else? Questions? Everybody's talking about weather. Yeah, we'll be back in the 80s, Patrick, by the weekend. So we we just have to rough it out for a couple days in the 50s and 60s, and then we'll be back on board. Although I'm traveling to Chicago for Thanksgiving. That's so sad. I don't own a winter coat. I don't know what to do. I don't. I'm worried about getting sick. I just don't want to leave Florida. I don't know. Why would I want to leave this weather? Okay, but that sounds pretty close to trolling, so I'm not going to talk about that anymore. I'm hoping that the lack of questions mean that everything was incredibly clear, incredibly lucid, right? That's why nobody asked questions, because we all know what we need to do. We all understood the session pretty well. If everybody says yes, that's what's going on. I'm not going to force you to stay here any longer. So if you're good to go, enjoy the rest of your night. Yes, Marissa, the 250 word reflection, the specific questions are on the final assignment sheet, so make sure that they're there. But most of them are based on what you learned this month, what sort of progress you made. But yeah, there are six very very specific questions, so they're located on that assignment sheet. Okay, I think I might still have it up, or maybe not. I closed a bunch of windows. Okay, you go to 4.3 final project. Right, you have this asset here, final project PDF, and that's where you get all the questions for the reflective essay. Okay, these six things here, you just have to answer them. Okay, so for those of you who feel comfortable and you think you're good to go, you're free to enjoy the rest of your evening. Thanks for taking time out this Tuesday night to spend time with me. If I don't hear from you, I probably will hear from a lot of you through messages or through questions, through offline things. Enjoy your Thanksgiving. But again, I'll probably hear from some of you. But in case I don't, take care. Have a good night. Thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording right now.